Good evening, I'm Hanomansing. Tonight, the death of an officer.
Today is the day that I've had nightmares about.
A Calgary police sergeant struck and killed on New Year's Eve. 2 teenagers in custody wanted for first-degree murder.
Our community is mourning on this first day of 2021.
It's a good thing just to make sure that you are safe.
Why new travel rules aren't stopping these passengers.
We should be here at home, plain and simple, if we carry a position of public trust.
And why Jason Kenney is stopping short of firing an Alberta cabinet minister who spent Christmas in Hawaii.
There's people that should have got those shots.
Outrage grows over spoiled vaccines in Wisconsin. A pharmacist deliberately destroying more than 500 doses.
2021, I'm hoping to spend less time at home and maybe more time doing unhealthy things.
Day 1 of 2021. Hopes, fears, and resolutions for the new year. This is The National. He's everything you would want in a quality police officer. That is how Calgary's police chief described Sergeant Andrew Harnett today. Harnett killed last night on duty, and now 2 teenagers, one just 17 years old, have been charged with first-degree murder. The search for the suspects leading to a tense encounter this afternoon, police bringing people out of a house. The suspect's vehicle had been stopped by Harnett, but then allegedly struck the officer while they fled. Harnett died in hospital around midnight, the beginning of the new year. Carolyn Dunn is at the Calgary intersection where the deadly encounter happened. And Carolyn, such a tragic start to 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly the Calgary police force in its entirety is taking a collective sigh of relief after an intense manhunt led to these arrests.
Your hands or I can see them.
A tactical team methodically emptied a Calgary home believed to be connected to the 2 suspects. Tensions were high as police scoured the city for 2 young men alleged to have killed one of their own. This raid came up empty in the search for 19-year-old Amir Abdurrahman and a 17-year-old male believed to be driving the car. Hours later, both suspects turned themselves into police. The 2 are charged with first-degree murder in the death of Sergeant Andrew Harnett, a 12-year veteran of the Calgary Police Service.
A family has lost a son, a sibling has lost a brother, a spouse has lost a partner, and many, many members of our service have lost a really good friend. We've all lost Sergeant Andrew Harnett.
Harnett's older brother, Jason, calls it devastating.
He loved policing. I mean, he didn't need to be out on Christmas Day. He didn't need to be out on New Year's Eve. And that's the last thing that I texted him before I wished him Happy New Year's was, you be safe.
Harnett's safety was shattered during a check stop when he pulled over a car with plates not matching the vehicle. The vehicle sped off, striking and killing the decorated officer seen here giving a police helper badge to a young boy on his beat.
His death reminds us of the very real risks taken by police officers every day to protect public safety.
They go to danger, the rest of us leave. And sometimes they deal with the worst elements of our community in order to protect the best elements of our community.
Charlotte Seehauer has lived in this neighborhood for decades. She was so moved by the thought of Harnett's family, she lay flowers.
They need all the support that they can get, and even if it's just a little bundle of flowers, just to let them know that people are thinking about them, and I myself, I'm praying for the family.
And Carolyn, we do expect some developments in this story tonight.
Yes, that's right. Both suspects are expected to appear before a justice of the peace tonight or possibly tomorrow so that they can be formally charged in person with first-degree murder.
All right. Thank you, Carolyn Dunn in Calgary this evening. Now, even though it's a new year, the risk of COVID-19 has certainly not diminished. And as the number of infections continues to rise in Canada, the federal government has issued new rules for air travel. Starting next Thursday, everyone flying back to Canada will have to test negative before boarding a plane. Sarah Levitt has the reaction, the confusion, and what happens if you can't get a test.
Honestly, I think it's a
It's a good idea because we don't want it to spread more.
We need control, and at the present time it's out of control.
Support for the federal government's new COVID-19 testing rules for incoming travelers. Support from people at Toronto's Pearson International Airport heading out on vacation, many of whom will be among the first to have to secure a negative test.
Headed to Cancun, Mexico.
Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Cayo Coco in Cuba.
Since March, any non-essential travel has been strongly discouraged by public health, yet people continue to go abroad. Health experts say requiring a negative test is a good step, that the hassle may deter people from traveling, but it's not perfect.
People still have to quarantine. People can still be infected after that test resolves. And so, we still need to focus on supporting people through their quarantine period.
The federal government says if you can prove tests weren't available, you can come back to a 14-day quarantine at a federally approved facility. Don't have proof? Well, you can't come back until you do, or you test negative.
It's a mess. Nobody knows. The agent doesn't know. The company doesn't know anything.
Some travelers arrived for check-in unaware of the new rules.
It's better to get tested and not to stay in quarantine for 2 weeks for nothing.
You still will have to quarantine though.
After the test?
Yeah.
No.
Equally confused are the airlines, left to enforce the rules. Not included in the discussion, they're scrambling to get answers and soothe customers' concerns.
When you do not have details, when you do not have clarity, by definition, you will have confusion and disjointed application.
Some of these travelers will be arriving home in a week's time. At least they hope to, with a negative test result in hand. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Toronto.
Alberta's Municipal Affairs Minister, Tracy Allard, has apologized for taking a Hawaiian holiday, disregarding public health advice against non-essential travel. But the Premier, Jason Kenney, chose not to ask for her resignation. Terry Reith looks at what Kenney is doing.
It was a significant error in judgment.
Premier Jason Kenney says he learned this week that his Municipal Affairs Minister, along with other government staffers, traveled internationally over the holidays. Tracy Allard was in Hawaii over Christmas, Kenney's Chief of Staff in Great Britain. He won't reveal who else was out of the country, but today the Premier partly blamed himself.
I have to take responsibility that I wasn't absolutely clear that there should be no international travel.
Earlier this week, Ontario Premier Doug Ford was not as understanding with his now former finance minister when he learned Rod Phillips was vacationing in the Caribbean.
I don't think it's reasonable for me as a leader to sanction people.
Instead, Kenney defended airline travel, noting tens of thousands of people from Alberta are taking winter vacations, and that in turn supports airlines like WestJet, which is based in Alberta. All this while public health has issued warnings against non-essential travel since the pandemic began. But Kenney's defense of high-flying government members is not playing well. While Allard was vacationing, Albertans were struggling through new restrictions, apart from loved ones and friends, and while hospitals and ICUs filled up.
The next time the Premier has to make a hard decision around COVID, Albertans are going to be resentful of the choices that, some of his staff and this minister made.
And I know that my actions seem dismissive of the frustration and grief that many have experienced. For that, I am truly and deeply sorry.
Kenney has now issued a directive asking politicians and government officials not to travel.
We should be here at home.
It's an issue Kenney is eager to put behind him, but like the virus, it's not likely going away anytime soon. Terry Reith, CBC News, Edmonton.
And a trip to Greece has cost a federal New Democrat her role in the shadow cabinet. Nikki Ashton announcing on Twitter tonight that she traveled to Greece to visit her grandmother who was ill. But the party says despite the circumstances, Canadians expect elected officials to lead by example and stay home. The party says neither leader Jagmeet Singh nor the whip were told about her trip ahead of time. On the first day of the new year, a lot of hope rests on the COVID vaccines, but there is widespread concern that this country needs to get more people their shots more quickly. Both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are available in this country, and as of yesterday, nearly 539,000 doses had been distributed, but just under 100,000 had been administered. Jayla Bernstein now on what's going on.
The fact that there is a vaccine at this point is better news than some had dared hope for. But those shots are not getting into Canadians' arms as quickly as hoped. According to data compiled by Oxford University, Canada's vaccine program lags behind others. Israel is leading the charge by a lot. Bahrain, the United Kingdom, even the United States are all ahead.
Every province acts like its own country. And so it's coordinated somewhat in an umbrella fashion, but then the actual deployment is provincial, and there can be a lot of variability there.
Across the country, there's been a lot of dissatisfaction. Alberta, which aimed to administer 29,000 shots by the end of 2020, failed to reach even half that. Ontario, too, has faced heavy scrutiny for its slow pace.
There's always some issues with bringing people to the vaccine. If you're bringing people from long-term care, we know the staffing is so difficult these days. We know the staff need to get the vaccine, but at the same time, do you pull a staff out for 2 hours?
Add to that logistical challenges of delivering the vaccine across a big country. Only 4 provinces were vaccinating today: Ontario, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia. In Manitoba, officials were gearing up a super site to open on Monday. Health officials expect things will start to speed up. The easier-to-distribute Moderna vaccine has arrived, and some provinces, including Ontario and Quebec, have started to use up vaccine set aside for the second dose.
Doses that we were keeping in the freezer, we can now give to someone else for a first dose.
Expectations are that Health Canada will approve more vaccines, and doctors across the country remain hopeful, saying hurdles aside, 2021 should be a better year. Jayla Bernstein, CBC News, Montreal.
Let's bring in Dr. Susie Hoda, an infectious disease specialist from University Health Network in Toronto. And Dr. Hoda, I want to show a picture that you shared on Twitter, colleagues at a long-term care facility giving vaccinations. So much we could talk about when it comes to logistics, but give us a sense of what has to happen before we get to this point.
There's a lot more than just getting a shot in the arm when it comes to vaccinating. So at first you have to get consent from people, and they have to understand what they're consenting to. So that requires some education. But also in long-term care residents, you have to reach out to substitute decision makers and sometimes a public guardian and trustee to get that consent. Then you have to have a system that's efficient and safe that actually allows that vaccination to happen, as well as monitoring for vaccination side effects afterwards, and a tracking system for documentation. That's a lot of coordination between long-term care homes, hospitals that are doing a lot of this work, and public health. And that's tough at the best of times, let alone over holidays and when people are tired from dealing with the pandemic.
As you said in your tweet, though, you're happy to see your team at work at that long-term care home. Listen, one more quick question while I have you. If a patient came to you and said, should they travel outside the country on vacation, your answer?
I would say no, not at this point in time. There's a lot going on in different countries, and we should really be focusing on containing what we have here within Canada right now.
Dr. Hoda, thanks for spending some time with us on this New Year's Day.
Thank you.
Now to the global immunization picture and a couple of key milestones today. As you heard, Israel is at the front of the pack.
Israel today is a global leader. We are the fastest giving vaccination nation in the world.
As of today, 1 million Israelis had received their first vaccine dose. The country of just over 9 million is giving more than 150,000 shots a day. The top priority has been people over the age of 60, those with underlying medical conditions, and health workers. And today, India approved its first vaccine, the one developed by AstraZeneca and Oxford University. This decision clears the way for it to be administered in the world's second most populous country, with one of the highest number of cases. The AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine is cheaper and easier to transport than its rivals, Pfizer and Moderna. In the United States, the rollout of vaccines is in chaos. Katie Nicholson shows us the outrage over one pharmacist who spoiled hundreds of doses. Just one indication of how the U.S. is struggling.
He was having a really hard time breathing.
It may be a new year, but for embattled healthcare workers, it's the same old fight.
Things are really bad. We're overwhelmed.
I've never seen a healthcare system pushed to the level that we're at.
There are vaccines, of course, but not as many as promised, and no centralized plan to actually get them into people's arms. That was left to the states.
This is the federal government abdicating its responsibility, leaving this up to the states, just like they did with testing, and we saw what happened with testing.
And so, vaccinations now millions of doses behind schedule as the vulnerable vie for a spot in line.
It's horrible that somebody would do that on purpose, deliberately do it.
Little wonder there's outrage after a Wisconsin pharmacist was arrested for deliberately taking more than 500 doses of the Moderna vaccine out of refrigeration, likely rendering them ineffective.
My reaction is I hope he sits for a long time, because there's people that should have got those shots. And what if they get the virus now?
Dozens received shots from the thawed batch and might now have to be revaccinated.
The 57 recipients of those vaccines have been notified. At this time, there is no evidence that the vaccinations pose any harm to them.
No word yet on his motivations, but the act forced others to review and step up security.
So right now, everything that we do have is double locked in the pharmacy.
A stark reminder of the vaccine's value.
We thought of this more like an armored truck full of gold, rather than glass vials full of, clear liquid.
Numbers out today have made the vaccine perhaps even more precious. The U.S. hit another COVID milestone, 20 million confirmed cases. And the CDC projects 80,000 more Americans could die from the virus in the next 3 weeks. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Washington.
Britain is marking the new year in the midst of a COVID storm. Even with parts of the country in strict lockdown, infections remain high. Today, the UK recording more than 50,000 new cases for the fourth day in a row. This latest surge is being driven in part by the new variant. A study released yesterday from London's Imperial College suggests the variant is, quote, hugely more infectious than previous versions. And with increasing COVID numbers, hospitals in the country are reporting extreme pressure. And to help alleviate some of that, Britain's National Health Service is reactivating its Nightingale hospitals. The temporary facilities were initially opened last spring during the first wave and then put on standby as case numbers fell. This one in London can handle 4,000 patients. More than 4 years in the making, Britain is finally out of the European Union.
This is an amazing moment for this country. We have our freedom in our hands, and it is up to us to make the most of it.
The first freight trucks and trains rolled into France from a post-Brexit UK, running smoothly, but not everything will be as easy. With new border rules and regulations in place, travel with the rest of Europe is no longer passport-free, and there are concerns of potential trade disruptions ahead. A sticking point during the final Brexit negotiations, fishing rights. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, says the deal gives Britain full control of its coastal waters. But as Farah Morali reports, some in the industry say the opportunity is not as advertised.
On the east coast of England, the seaside town of Aldeburgh is known for its fresh catches. For 32 years, catches like these have been Kirk Stripling's life. He hoped a Brexit deal would shore up support for British fishermen like him.
There was no negotiations at all as far as we're concerned, because we've still got foreign boats fishing within 6 miles of the coast.
We've gained nothing out of it at all.
Further down the beach, a similar sense of disappointment.
Foreign boats, they seem to always get a bigger cut of the quota, and they just can carry on fishing, whereas we can't. It's all very unfair.
At the heart of the frustration, the promise that Brexit would allow UK fishermen to take back control of these waters, even restricting the number of EU boats allowed to fish on this coast. The deal signed between both sides delivered nothing close to that.
It was in many ways quite a symbolic debate about the appearance of control.
Experts say the Brexit Leave campaign sold fishermen the idea of sovereignty over the British coast. But when it came down to the wire, concessions had to be made.
And it's certainly not going to be a transformation on the scale that some pro-Brexit campaigners have promised.
It's those broken promises that have left many disillusioned. The new agreement will allow the UK to take back 25% of the rights to fish for certain species. The catches, Stribling says some of those fish aren't even in UK waters. He calls it a raw deal.
Most of that 25% is sort of fictional fish, which is paper fish which is not really caught anyway. Why should fishing be the sacrificial lamb? Why did they need to sacrifice all these communities to save something else? It's not negotiations, it's surrender.
For many here, it's not just their futures that were at stake with the deal. It was the future of the industry here too, one that they hope won't be washed away. Farah Morali, CBC News, Aldborough.
The past year has taken a toll on the mental health of many Canadians.
It's not just me, like this is something that so many people need.
Up next, one Ontario teen's fight to put help just 3 digits away. Plus, new year, new tax rules.
People just have a few questions regarding things that didn't exist in 2019.
What you need to know before you get ready to file. And later, starting 2021 with a splash.
We've seen people filling up a bathtub with ice water, rolling around in the snow in their backyard.
A new pandemic take on an old tradition. We're back in 2. This pandemic has, for some, made mental health issues more acute. But a teenager from Ontario is trying to help. She's hoping to save lives after once thinking about taking her own. Maddie Mugridge has been leading a campaign to create a new suicide prevention hotline where help would be only 3 digits away. Ellen Morrow has her story.
One day it kind of just came to be too much.
Maddie Mugridge was just 13 years old when she began contemplating taking her own life. One desperate night, she logged on to a suicide prevention chat room looking for help, but no one answered.
I'm pretty sure it'd been 3 hours and I was like, okay, no one is going to come on. And so I kind of just got off, and it was just a really disappointing experience. I kind of felt more alone than I did even before trying to reach out to them.
Mugridge did end up getting support. Now 19, she wants to help others, launching this petition pushing the government to create a simplified national crisis line, just 3 digits, 988.
It would be so much better for everyone if it was shorter, easier to remember. You didn't have to go looking, you just already knew where to call.
Adoptee. Parliament signaled its agreement, unanimously passing a motion to establish the 988 hotline.
Help should only be 3 digits away.
Conservative MP Todd Doherty tabled that motion, but when the hotline would be up and running isn't clear.
There's political will behind this. It is the will of Parliament. Government heard this, that members of Parliament wanted to get this done.
The urgency fueled by the gloom of 2020, the pandemic's toll on the mental health of Canadians immense.
I think people can start feeling a sense of despair and just sort of this relentlessness and just the absolutely no real sense as to when things are going to change for the better again.
From March to October, COVID-19 was mentioned in 19% of calls to Canada's Suicide Prevention Service, a 10-digit number difficult to remember. That reality, says Mugridge, makes the creation of a 3-digit hotline all the more important.
It's not just me, this is something that so many people need.
Maybe now, more than ever. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Toronto.
Up next, how some Canadian businesses adapted during this unprecedented year.
Millions of face masks, intricate COVID swabs. They made 30 million of these.
A look at some of the creative fixes to answer a pandemic problem. One thing we can all agree on about this pandemic is that it's caused unprecedented change. Many Canadians have lost loved ones or fallen ill themselves, but all of us have had our daily lives drastically affected, from what we wear to how we shop and work, even how we celebrate life's milestones. At the same time, the economy has been ravaged with no recovery in sight, businesses, big and small, suffering, downsizing, or shuttering permanently. But some businesses thrive through the changes, turning their focus to new products that help the companies and Canadians at the same time. Peter Armstrong now with more on that.
Just as COVID was shutting down the economy, entrepreneurs across Canada were ramping up. Door manufacturers in Manitoba building plastic shields, distilleries in Halifax making hand sanitizer, clothing manufacturers in Toronto making masks.
We recognized early that, kids are going to be a big issue here, and it got so much attention, so we just started spinning it off into prints.
This company in Woodbridge, Ontario, usually makes the foam that goes into the seats of your car. Ontario Premier Doug Ford visited in April as they shipped boxes of masks.
You guys are champions. You guys are the best.
Today, that company's made more than 30 million masks.
It's probably the most fulfilling thing I've ever been a part of.
The Automotive Parts Manufacturing Association offered to retool entire production lines across Ontario. Dozens of companies answered the call in what Volpe calls the biggest peacetime mobilization of industrial capacity in Canadian history.
Millions of face masks, intricate COVID swabs. They made 30 million of these. They came up with these Mitchell Plastics that makes center consoles for RAV4s and Ram trucks. Made 400,000 of these without a contract.
In the end, it wasn't just the businesses that shifted. The way Canadians see those businesses changed too.
Canadians understand better now than they did last year that there's a dignity in making things.
And even now, as the economy struggles under the weight of a second wave, economists say all this shows Canadian companies are more creative and more flexible than many thought.
A lot of Canadians, myself included, I never would have thought we could see such a transition in manufacturing.
Years from now, there will be monuments to the health workers who stood on the front lines of this catastrophe. But spare a thought, too, for the entrepreneurs that found a way to make sure those workers and all of us had the protective gear we needed. Peter Armstrong, CBC News, Toronto.
But for businesses that have struggled and Canadians who have lost work, the end of 2020 means it's time to figure out the bottom line. Many of you may be wondering how your tax returns will be affected by federal aid. Susanna De Silva has some answers.
There is a lot of uncertainty surrounding 2021, but accountant Joey Walia is sure of one thing. He is going to be busy.
We're already starting to get a lot of calls. People just have a few questions regarding things that didn't exist in 2019.
After more than a decade in the tax business, he is fielding more calls than ever before from individuals who normally file themselves with questions about various government assistance programs, including the CERB, which will be taxed as income.
So advice to folks, there's going to be tax bill. Set aside about 18% to 22% of CERB that they have received, because there is going to be that tax bill for sure.
But for the millions more Canadians working from home in 2020, a change on the plus side, a simplified process, at least for that tax year, to claim a working from home deduction, $2 a day up to $400.
The CRA has made it pretty clear that what they announced is just for 2020. I think they want to assess what's going on next year and figure it out. Longer term, I think the big issue is going to be, will we simplify the rules if people start working at home more?
And with the country battling the second wave of the virus, many are calling on the government to extend the income tax deadlines for individuals and businesses like it did in 2020.
Anything could help, and this would be one of the things that the government should look at by just giving us a bit more time.
Restaurant owner Hasib Sarwari says his business took an even harder hit in the fall, and January 1st's increase to CPP contributions is another blow to his bottom line. But he says one thing that would help, more business tax deferrals like the ones offered in 2020, because he expects more tough months ahead.
Yes, the vaccines are out. There's hope at the end of the tunnel, but it might be a while before customers are going to feel confident going back to restaurants.
Sarwari says for small businesses like his, any relief could make the difference between survival and shutting their doors for good. Susanna De Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
Still ahead with the NHL's new season set to start this month, we revisit my conversation with Hanomansing, host of Hockey Night in Canada, Punjabi, about his push for representation both on and off the ice. Welcome back. Ottawa has given the green light for the start of NHL training camps. The federal government will waive the mandatory 14-day quarantine for players and staff to return to the country on what they describe as national interest grounds. The 7 Canadian teams will play only each other in a new North Division, and so all of their games will be played in Canada. But 4 of the provinces still need to approve the plan. So far, only Alberta has signed on. The first game is scheduled for less than 2 weeks from now. January 13th. It's not just players looking forward to returning to the rink, and tonight I want to replay a conversation I had a few weeks ago with Hanomansing, one of the stars of Hockey Night in Canada Punjabi, a program which, like him, is breaking through barriers. From a high-energy goal call on Hockey Night in Canada Punjabi, a moment that went viral, especially among Pittsburgh fans.
Okay, so that's top speed right there.
It has been a remarkable and unlikely path for Hanomansing. It started in Brooks, Alberta. He loved hockey and broadcasting.
I've always wanted to do this. This is a dream come true.
But was told a man with a turban was a long shot to get on sports television. Hanomansing proved those people wrong.
Hanomansing.
The Vancouver Canucks with a gutsy comeback victory to close out this series against the Minnesota Wild.
He's embraced both hockey and his heritage, as he writes in his new book. And as you can see, when he tried to teach some Calgary Flames some Punjabi hockey terms.
Maria shot, kita goal.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And Hanomansing joins us now from Calgary. How are you?
Doing well, Ian.
I'm guessing a lot of people who are watching haven't watched Hockey Night in Canada in Punjabi. So what would you say to them has been the accomplishment of that program?
It's tough to say just one because there's been so many achievements, but I think first and foremost, growing the game at a grassroots level. We've heard from so many families who've put their kids into minor hockey because they've become fans of the game through the show, but also having 3 generations sit together, and it's a Saturday tradition now where grandparents and grandkids are sitting together and they're all fans of the game because it's available to them in Punjabi. And then representation, I would say as well, for a person like myself and my colleagues, for us to get our foot into the door in terms of the hockey broadcasting world, it was only possible through something like Hockey Night in Canada Punjabi.
Not surprisingly, Punjabi is not filled with terms for ice hockey, so you and your colleagues had to actually come up with a bit of a vocabulary. We saw that in a little bit of that in the segment earlier. So I want to talk about a couple of those terms and tell me the story behind them. Penalty box, for example.
Yeah, well, our show, we're much more enthusiastic and we like to have a lot of fun. And I like to say we add the spice or the masala to the hockey commentary.
Tampa Bay Dallas Stars,
and so instead of penalty box, we converted into Sajada Dabba, which translates back into English as box of punishment. And there's a lot of fun terms we've created, like Japared shot, a slap to the face, and made it a hybrid with shot there. So, and those have been really popular within the community.
Tell me about bad period. I like that term you came up with.
Bad period. Well, you know, when the team's coming back from a bad period, we like to say they need to have a cup of chai, right? You need that tea, that caffeine to keep you going, as most East Indians have every day.
So we saw the segment with the Calgary Flames players who were trying their hand at some of those terms. I want to play another segment of you talking to Flames players.
Well, who do you think looks the most Punjabi? This is the short list.
House Adrienne's on that list. I have no idea. He's the exact opposite, but it's got to be G. It's got to be. Yeah. I mean, he has the flow there. Usually he keeps it a little shorter than that, but I mean, he could grow a beard in about 6 hours, I think, and shave him twice a day probably.
So there you're asking Flames players, which player looks the most Punjabi? I kind of think 20 years ago, somebody wouldn't have gone in a dressing room and done a segment like that, or it might have been a bit awkward. How have players reacted to you and your questions and bits like that?
You're right, Ian, that we've come a long way. And I think that most NHL hockey players, especially in Canada, they know about Hockey Night Punjabi. They know what we're about. And they also realize that we have to be doing a lot more as a sport to grow the game and to introduce this game to other communities. So when you look at it from that angle, they've mostly been very welcoming. And as time goes on, NHL players realize that there has to be more going on in terms of social media and video production and this type of thing. So the players, for the most part, have been very welcoming.
Yeah, they were fantastic in that segment. But you say for the most part, we don't want to dwell on the negativity, but there must have been some rough times for you.
I mean, there's been, in terms of specific players, there's been some comments sometimes on social media, but especially more, I would just say in the general public, we've had to kind of initially for Hockey Night Punjabi prove why this is so important. And, you know, there's been times where people say that why not just have it in English? Well, there's a need here for this, and it's become a want as well, because the community is growing so much. As I like to say, the changing face of Canada, that's what we're seeing nowadays, and we want the game to grow and flourish. So that's part and parcel with it.
So you started your career in small town radio in Brooks, Alberta in high school, and I, you know, some parallels with what I did in small town Nova Scotia many, many years before. But big difference with you. You have a turban, you have a beard, you wanted to get into sports, and you had people, even well-meaning people, tell you that probably wasn't a place that was going to be very welcoming. How did you feel when you heard that?
Well, it was something I actually got used to, because I had to continually justify myself as a Canadian. And you say well-intentioned, you know, I've had people come up and tell me in my life, welcome to Canada. And, you know, it's just this assumption that because I look so different, or our community looks so different, we're new here. But those types of discouraging remarks that I wouldn't find a place in sports television because there wasn't any diversity in sports television when I was growing up. Those were difficult times, and there are moments that I really remember, but I was very lucky to have moments of encouragement right after that. Like my small town, Brooks, Alberta, the radio station gave me an opportunity to do high school news and sports there. And then I did post-secondary and eventually got on with Hockey Night in Canada. So there was also encouraging moments that came up right after the discouraging ones.
We're at a moment of reckoning in society, but in sports as well when it comes to racial justice, right? The NBA has embraced it. The NHL, some players would suggest, maybe has struggled with it a little bit. What's your view of how the league is dealing with that issue?
Well, I think there's a sign that's we're going in the right direction. And I think why that is because players, teams, and the league are now taking a stand, despite the fact that they're actually alienating some of their fan base who don't want us to be talking about these issues. And I think the fact that we're still having this conversation within the sports world, it's a good sign, because we need to have these conversations in order to make progress in society and in humanity. And it's not marrying politics with the world of sports. This is just talking about the basic human rights of respect for one another. And normally you've seen players of color, players of diversity that have had to take the stand, but we're finally seeing other players of the majority also take a strong stance on this. And I think that's what's really going to help us.
Ryan, I know the proper answer to this took a whole book to write, but in a couple of paragraphs, what's your story?
I would say my story is one about defying the odds. And, when I was told that because of my how I look, my appearance, and because of me being from a small town, I wouldn't be, able to have this dream come to fruition where I'm a part of the hockey broadcasting world. But my message to people out there is, if I can do it, you can achieve whatever your hopes and goals and dreams are. And we're especially very lucky to be in Canada where these opportunities are available to us. The book is also about Canada's multiculturalism, where you're able to use the power of sport and music to, it's a nation building process where it brings people together. And I would tell you, Ian, that my entire experience growing up in Canada would have been drastically different had it not been for the power of sport and for hockey in Canada. And that's my message, is that, it does bring us together, and we are in a beautiful country, the best one in the world, and my story proves it.
All right, Ryan, really nice speaking with you.
Thanks so much, Ian.
And still with hockey, a decisive victory for Canada at the World Juniors last night.
Turn it over. Now Dylan Cousins in, shoots, scores! Dylan Cousins fires it home.
A 4-1 win over Finland in a battle of the last two undefeated teams in Group A. So that gives Canada top spot in the group heading into the quarterfinal against the Czech Republic tomorrow. After the break, welcoming in 2021. How Canadians are setting different kinds of goals and looking ahead to a more hopeful year. Parts of India woke up to a hopeful 2021 with some attending crowded ceremonies today. North Korea, meanwhile, sang in the new year with a children's performance in front of a masked crowd. And mummers defied COVID-19 restrictions in Philadelphia, taking to the streets in protest of their annual parade being canceled. So New Year's traditions look different around much of the world today as people said goodbye to a tough year. So how are Canadians moving forward? Stephanie Mercier went to find out.
Even a little rain on the slopes can't dampen the enthusiasm for 2021.
Even though it's wet and rainy, we're still looking forward to 2021, that's for sure.
After a bumpy 2020, many are hoping for an easier ride this year.
With the vaccines coming out, there's hope.
Even if we're hoping it's all downhill from here in 2021, the optimism seems to be tempered with last year's anxiety, especially when it comes to making resolutions.
It's too unpredictable to make any resolutions this year.
Those who have made goals are keeping them small.
Simple things like walking, reading more,
go outside more with the kids, not letting them hold me back.
not clinging to any expectations. Trying to just stay open to whatever might unfold.
Down the mountain at the beach, more enthusiastic revelers hoping for a refresh.
Just kind of washing 2020 away, looking forward, a little optimism obviously coming into 2021.
We're working on our good health and well-being and being happy.
I hope the New Year's better, but set the bar low expectations.
If you're finding it hard to take the resolution plunge this year, you're not alone, says one expert.
There are many things we don't have control over that we usually do. So it's hard to make a resolution if you actually don't know if you're going to have control over that. So I think it's really important to take extremely good care of ourselves right now.
Even if this year taking care of yourself feels a little different.
2021, I'm hoping to spend less time at home and maybe more time doing unhealthy things.
So here's to the new year and brighter days on the horizon. Stephanie Mercier, CBC News, Vancouver.
And as we look forward, we'd like to take one last look back. As part of our Take That 2020 project, we've asked you to share some moments worth celebrating after a year that's been such a strain.
I'm Chloe Pasternak, and this is Adam Trappid, and our 2020 bright spot is that we got engaged.
Yes, of course, oh my God.
It's definitely been a tough year for a lot of people, which is why we feel so incredibly fortunate to be able to celebrate this moment together.
Hi there, my name's Elaine Gray, and this is Grace. To me, when I look at 2020, this is my bright spot. If COVID hadn't happened, I wouldn't have Grace.
I'm Caitlin McNichol, and my 2020 bright spot was graduating university and then starting my dream job teaching in the UK. My head teacher, who's been amazingly supportive, has said, if you make it through this, you'll make it through anything.
I'm Tara Sadam. This is Ivy, Asher, and Kai. And our 2020 bright spot was when my husband and I welcomed our fourth child, Nora Rose. She was born on February 20th, which is 3 weeks before the first lockdown. In the end, it was a hard year, but we wouldn't change it for the world. Happy New Year to everyone.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Pretty happy kids. Next on The Moment, a cool way to enter the new year. How Toronto's annual polar bear dip continued, even in a pandemic. That's next in our Moment. This is last year at the annual polar bear dip in Toronto, when hundreds of people took a freezing cold swim on the first day of the year, in part for charity. And this year they didn't let the pandemic stop that yearly tradition. Their splash into 2021 is tonight's Moment.
We've been doing the dip every year on January 1st at noon down at Sunnyside Beach. It's been a long-standing tradition, a lot of fun. We didn't want to lose the spirit of the event, so we've been asking people this year to do their dip in their own way, take a video of it, share it with us. It's been a rough bunch of months, and so, jumping in the lake is probably not the worst thing you could do. We've seen people, filling up a bathtub with ice water. We've seen rolling around in the snow in their backyard. We've had quite a few people go down to Lake Ontario and do their own individual dips. It's a nice solitary outdoor activity. There's no getting around it. It's cold, but it's exhilarating. It's a fantastic way to start the year. I've seen those people posting videos of them doing the dip and keeping the streak going, as it were.
Is it exhilarating, though? I mean, I guess so. And we saw in Stephanie Mercier's piece that people were obviously doing the dip here in Vancouver as well. Every January 1st, I feel like I'm 365 days and 15 pounds away from giving it a try. That is the National for January 1st. I hope you can join us on Sunday for Cross Country Checkup. I'll be live on CBC Radio 1 at 4 Eastern, and then later that evening back here for the National. Good night and Happy New Year.